Hi, and welcome to our forecast for the week of March 9th through March 15th, 2025. We're going to get into the usual this week, focusing on the biggest astrological transits coming up this week and doing a 3-card tarot spread to help you root and ground and prepare for what's to come. So before I get into it, I want to mention that some of you are listening or watching on YouTube, where I've been posting these for a while. Some of you may be listening via my podcast. This is the first episode that I'm cross-posting on the Feeling Loudly podcast. So yay, if you're listening. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you want to catch this via podcast format too, you can always do that by following me at Feeling Loudly. Okay, let's get into this week's astrology, which is very big. This is a big week astrologically. As a lot of you know, Venus has already stationed retrograde, and we're closing out week 1 of Venus retrograde as I record this. We are heading into a week that is featuring a eclipse, a full moon, lunar south node eclipse, and the start of Mercury retrograde. And so yes, that is 2 retrogrades, both Venus and Mercury, and eclipse season. And so there's been a lot of talk about the month of March because this is the loudest month of astrology in 2025. And when we're entering eclipse windows and when we're experiencing retrogrades, it can feel like a lot of stuff is shifting around us, and we might feel compelled to hunker down and to kind of go into hiding and protect ourselves if that's our way of coping with big energy. We might feel compelled to surge ahead and try to roll with the momentum and make changes. We might be pulled in both directions or none of those, something else entirely. And I want to emphasize that during big and loud weeks, we tend to sink into our usual coping strategies. Just think about periods of life when life is loud and things get busy and messy and complicated. We all have our go-to coping strategies, and those will get louder when life gets louder because we're trying to figure out how to manage the current of energy, the current of events. And so understand that going into this week, you're likely to notice those things kind of peaking or getting louder and bigger within you, and that is understandable. So I'm prefacing this week of talking about the technicals and everything with that message because I want to invite you to practice compassion this week and to practice patience. Patience with yourself, patience with other people, patience with life if it's not moving at the pace that you hoped it would, or if events are unfolding in unexpected ways that kind of veer you off course. This is not going to be a week to cling to control and attempt to fixate on an outcome, because things could go a very different direction. Maybe that outcome does pan out, maybe it doesn't. We really don't know. And this is a really good time to practice sitting with uncertainty. Okay, that's my little pep talk before we get into it. So to speak to the actual transits, I'm recording this on Sunday, March 9th, and the moon enters Leo later tonight. Whenever the moon enters Leo, now that we have Pluto in Aquarius, the moon will immediately face off with Pluto. So it enters Leo and it almost immediately forms an opposition with Pluto in Aquarius. And so whenever we experience a moon-Pluto opposition, and especially in the fixed signs, we tend to feel like our emotions get more intense. We might feel the instinct to self-protect. We might feel suspicious. We might feel guarded. Or we might really open up to new levels of depth and intimacy in our relationships. But sometimes that begins with some type of trigger event or activation that causes us to feel temporarily unsafe or guarded or fearful or just a little bit more closed off. So know that our Leo moon transits for the next 20 years are going to feature a Pluto opposition, and they're going to bring in some emotional messiness. It is temporary, but it's sort of like an initiatory event that occurs as the moon is passing through Leo. So you might be feeling kind of in your feels or in the vibes on Sunday. On Tuesday, March 11th, Mercury forms a conjunction with Venus retrograde. And this is occurring around 9 degrees of Aries. So if you have cardinal placements around 9 degrees, then you might especially notice this conjunction. This is a major moment in the Venus retrograde cycle. And I'm going to just actually read you something that I wrote in my Venus retrograde guide, which is also linked below if you want to go deeper on that. So on March 11th, Venus forms a conjunction with Mercury in Aries, nudging us to think about and maybe articulate the urges brewing beneath the surface. It's a day to explore old narratives around desire, sexuality, passion, and rage. What desires are you ready to speak aloud, if only to yourself? So I would sit with that question. What desires are you ready to speak aloud, if only to yourself? That might mean sitting with your journal. It might mean voice noting about it. It might mean going for a long walk and sort of just stream of consciousness, allowing yourself to speak and explore. There's something that is a bit subterranean that's getting unearthed on March 11th. And this might be a moment for you to get honest with yourself about what this Venus retrograde is already revealing to you, about what you care about, what you need, what you desire, what you value, Venus, and maybe the ways that your life is set up to honor that, or the ways that it might not be set up. And that could be showing up particularly in your relationships, since Venus is a very relational planet. But particularly in the Aries part of your natal chart is where this is going to be accentuated. And really diving in and using your words in order to communicate. And that doesn't have to be to other people, right? It could be, but it could just be to yourself. It could be via a private medium that helps you feel safe enough to explore some of the stuff that's been brewing beneath the surface for you. And this is material that you may have been noticing brewing since Venus entered its pre-retrograde shadow. So basically the last month and change. And especially since Venus stationed retrograde on March 1st. On Wednesday, the moon enters Virgo on Wednesday, March 12th. And this kind of technically opens up the full moon window, although we're definitely feeling the impact of Friday's full moon and eclipse building up throughout this whole week because it's a big event. But Wednesday, the moon enters Virgo. And so now we're really in it. We're in the window. And that's followed a few hours later by the sun forming a conjunction to Saturn. So let's touch on the moon in Virgo, since this is the energy of this full moon. This is a full moon lunar south node eclipse in Virgo. A moon in Virgo transit takes us out of that Pluto opposition fully. And it also brings us into focus around the things that might feel out of alignment. So we just talked about the Mercury-Venus conjunction, right? We're exploring something that may feel like tempting or some type of unmet desire or something that we want, and we might be wanting to put words to it. And then we enter Mercurial Virgo, ruled by Mercury. And so instantly our emotional nature is also attuned more to the mind and to processing and sort of chewing on our emotions in a way in order to get down to the base and in order to understand them. Virgo and the moon in combination can be a very analytical placement, and it can be a transit for us that invites us to maybe overanalyze how we're feeling and to get very caught up in the process of breaking something down into parts and looking at them. And this is also energy that we're bringing into the full moon, right? And so whatever comes up around Wednesday, we're taking with us into this eclipse. And you'll likely notice this in your Virgo house. On that same day, Wednesday, the sun forms a conjunction to Saturn and kind of brings the mood down. This can be a bit of a buzzkill transit at times, or a time when we at least get serious and look at the facts. We want to focus on what feels secure or insecure. Saturn is a planet that wants to draw us towards some type of foundation or security or structure that feels sound. and built with integrity. And so this might be a day when you're actually thinking about the concept of integrity, or it might be a time when you're really focusing on what needs to be sustained and what needs to get done in order to feel secure. And so this can be a sort of like maturation moment. It can be a moment when we feel like we kind of level up in a way. And maybe that means taking care of a responsibility that really needs to get done, or attuning to things that are not going well so that we can right the ship. And I say that especially paired with the moon being in Virgo at that point. We are really attuned to what's not working. And so that's something to be mindful of, that you could be hyper attuned to what's not working and go into more of a critical or even sort of depressive headspace if you don't balance that out with some broader perspective and a hefty dose of compassion. So a day when you might feel a little bit harder on yourself, or if not that, just feel more serious and more kind of tuned in to like, gotta get this done, have to take care of this. This doesn't feel secure. Let's shore this up and move forward. On Friday, March 14th, 2 days later, we then experience our full moon, which is occurring at 2356 Virgo. And full moon in Virgo means that the moon is in Virgo and the sun is in Pisces, polar signs. I'm going to go deep on this on my Patreon. So if you want a deep reading on this full moon and on this eclipse, along with a 3-card tarot reading for this particular lunation, you can join me over on Patreon starting at $4 a month, or you can buy this as a one-off reading once it's live. Full moon in Virgo paired with a lunar south node eclipse is drawing our focus to outdated patterns, particularly around the ways that we attempt to control or maybe at times get sucked into analytical mode or overthinking at the expense of living and staying present. An eclipse is inherently unpredictable and involves the lunar nodes, also known as the nodes of fate. And so often during eclipses and during eclipse windows, we're experiencing fateful events or course corrections that draw us toward a path and maybe draw us away from another one. Often we have to make sacrifices in order to make gains elsewhere. And the axis of Virgo and Pisces does involve a lot of sacrifice. And so one of the questions and invitations I see coming up for this eclipse window is, what are you willing to sacrifice? And that doesn't have to be in like a martyrdom way. It can definitely show up that way. So I would be thoughtful of that and just be conscious of the fact that you are, if you're inclined to martyr yourself, if that's a pattern that you get swept up in relationships or in just life in general, this is a time when that might be on turbo mode. And if it is on turbo mode, it's probably because it wants to get washed out. And sometimes things get louder so we can see them more clearly, not because we're regressing. And I talked about this last week, not because we're regressing per se, but because sometimes we make things bigger so we can see them and we can deal with them. And that could very well happen throughout this window. This opening eclipse is drawing our focus probably to the minutia in a way that actually will help us undo something, or it might be undone for us. If you're attempting, again, to control, if you're attempting to steer the ship in the direction you think is best, whether that's for yourself or for other people, you will likely get a little kick, a little nudge, or maybe a big kick or a big nudge, because this is not the time to be attempting to control. Like, this is something I've already been noticing in myself. I definitely have control stuff that I'm trying to work through, and I'm sure this eclipse will kick my butt a little bit. But it's something that I'm noticing peaking within me. And that sort of like attention to detail that Virgo is known for can turn into obsessive focus on the minutia at the expense of the whole. And so if you notice yourself getting so swept up in the small details or in the things that aren't working or are going wrong, okay, what needs to be brought into balance there? How can you balance that out by swimming over to polar Pisces to take a grander look and again to bring in compassion? This eclipse is probably going to clear stuff out again. It's a moment when we are probably having to let something go. A south node lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. Very, very, very focused on release, on exhale, on cleansing, on purification, and on generally like I think I said exhale already, on exhaling. So maybe you want to do a lot of breathing throughout this eclipse window. That's a great way to cope with big astro weather. Breathing, focusing on the body. Virgo is an earth sign, a mutable earth sign. And so often there's something that needs to shift in the way that we're caring for ourselves, the way we're caring for our space, or generally moving through our day-to-day life. There's some invitation to change. And if you heed that call, you could notice some really powerful, grander shifts in your life throughout this eclipse window. Later that day, the sun forms a sextile to Uranus. So the sun is in Pisces, Uranus is in Taurus. They form a sweet little sextile. And this feels like an opportune moment to catch the momentum of that eclipse, which just occurred like a few hours before, and to shift something in our energy. I mean, it's going to happen. So we might not even have to like opt into it or do something here per se. But there is some type of energetic shift that's occurring with the Sun Uranus sextile on the heels of a very bright and big eclipse that is asking us to express ourselves in a new way and to maybe get a little bit radical with it and to do something to shake up the tension and release the frenetic energy. That could look like physical movement. It could look like like shifting our routine temporarily. It could look like taking a break. These can be very tiring moments in astrology. Eclipses and Uranus transits can be very tiring. And so if you can give yourself space and wiggle room to maybe literally wiggle throughout the week or to do something to release, that would be great too. That night, the moon enters Libra. And when the moon enters Libra, we're sliding into relational territory even more. And coming off of this Virgo eclipse that night, we're definitely still very much in it, right? And we are this whole like 2-week period and beyond, we're in the eclipse energy. But the moon entering Libra feels like it softens things a little bit. So this might be a night when we want to kind of connect with other people and talk through what's coming up for us, or generally find ways to build more harmonious connection in a moment of where a lot is up. There's a lot that's up, and these events are occurring collectively and not just personally. And so we're going to notice themes in the news and themes around us that are reflecting back some of the patterns that I'm mentioning occurring at a personal level. And I want to emphasize that because that's always the case with astrology. Unless we're talking about purely natal astrology, we're always considering the fact that these events are bigger than just us. And so if you get swept up into the personal and the subjective, also try to take a moment to note the way that life and the world around you is reflecting some of those patterns back to you, if only to feel more at home in the world and to feel more connection, so that you don't go into mode of over personalizing things that are happening to you and forgetting the fact that we're existing in this grander context together and that we truly are microcosms of the whole. On Saturday, March 15th, Mercury stations retrograde at 9 degrees and 35 minutes of Aries. So you'll probably notice, if you've been paying attention to the signs I've been mentioning and the degrees, that a lot of this stuff is happening between nearly the same degrees of Aries and Pisces, and on the other hand, polar Virgo. And so again, our full moon / eclipse was at 23, almost 24 degrees of Virgo. And this is roughly the same degree where Venus will station direct eventually. We also have Mercury stationing retrograde at 9:35 Aries and Venus stationed retrograde at 10:50 Aries. So just a little over a degree away. And the eclipse that we have coming up in Aries will be at roughly the same degree. So we're highlighting this whole range between late Pisces and early Aries that is incredibly active in this moment. And I talked about that more in the Venus retrograde guide, and I won't harp on it here since I mentioned it last week too, but those areas of our charts are super active and under a great degree of change and flux. And what happens when we're under pressure and under change is things tend to get tighter and they kind of vibrate. And that can feel like a physical sensation. Like you might be noticing this sort of like tightness and vibration and frenetic energy in your body. But that can also be sort of a metaphorical energy or literal energy that we're working with, is like almost like an atom vibrating under pressure, or a seed when it's about to open and burst and create new life. And when we experience that sort of tension, it can feel like an experience of chrysalis. It can feel like we are being squeezed and tightened before great change occurs. And sometimes it's hard to tell, like, am I being born or am I dying? Like, not literally, but it can sort of feel so charged that you don't quite know where things are going after the change, but you know change is about to occur. And standing at the precipice of that change can feel really loud and sometimes disorienting. And so, again, what can you do to care for your body? And what can you do to exhale some of that frenetic energy as it comes up, which it probably will for most of us? In Aries, we like to sweat. We like to maybe like expel it through the voice, like using a lot of words to say, like, maybe we need to yell a little bit, maybe we need to vocalize, which can also touch on Taurus. And we do have Uranus and Taurus, as I mentioned. And so thinking about how you can engage your body in this process as much as possible is a really great go-to. Like, what is my body telling me and what does it need? Maybe I need to jump around the room a little bit. Maybe I need to shake my arms. Maybe I need to shout. Maybe I need to have some soothing tea. But probably you need to get something out of your system. And I keep like shaking my hands as I talk about it. So know that getting something out of your system and then tending to yourself after that is probably the best sort of twofold practice. So what can I do to exhale and release? And then what can I do to soothe and repair? With Mercury stationing retrograde, we are being asked to explore our instincts, our urges, and to pause before making impulsive choices. Mercury in Aries can be naturally impulsive and can sort of blurt out the thing or say the thing or make the choice and like make the move. And that's not always the wrong move, but sometimes it can get us into sticky territory. And so this might be the moment to pause and to take note of what's going on around you and to try to synthesize it a little bit before you take a step forward. And if you do just end up going for it, then double thumbs up. I hope it goes well. Okay, let's get into our tarot reading for this week. So our anchor card for the week of March 9th through March 15th is the Page of Wands. This card often feels like Aries to me. Cardinal fire, the Page of Wands. This is the modern witch tarot, and we have someone who's holding this big wand and they're staring off into the horizon. And they look like they're solo and they're on some kind of adventure. Their ribbon and their hair is blowing in the wind and their eyes are up and they seem confident. They seem like they're ready, but they're also kind of poised and paused. They're not in motion. They're taking in something ahead and sort of maybe looking for a sign or looking for an indication that it's time to go. And so you could be in this mode. This could be representing you and your energy, or it could be representing someone else. Often the court cards do represent actual people. And the Page of Wands is a fiery spirit and someone who's ready for adventure and someone who wants to rock with it. But this page, again, is more in pause mode and they're taking things in and considering before they step forward. So this feels like a pretty direct reflection of what I mentioned with Venus, or I'm sorry, Venus is in Aries too, also retrograde, but also Mercury stationing retrograde. So how can you pause and take in the horizon and maybe invite in presence and take in the information that you're receiving without immediately lurching forward? Our challenge this week is the Six of Pentacles. So this is usually a Taurus card, and the Six of Pentacles in this deck features this person who is giving gifts to two people who are kneeled on the ground in this sort of like gratitude posture. I can feel sometimes with the Six of Pentacles like there's a power differential, like someone is doing us a favor, or there's some element of charity. Sometimes people associate this card with mutual aid, but it does often feel more like charity. And there is, again, that difference in power. Someone has more, and maybe someone is in a position of giving someone something, and that can insert the sort of complicated dynamic between people. And so this could very well be a week, again, when we're exploring patterns around martyrdom and maybe what we give in order to wield power over other people, or where that might be happening to us. Like, this is very real complex that exists with both Pisces and Virgo, but I would say in this case, more so Virgo. We're dealing with a Virgo full moon, lunar, south node eclipse, right? And this is an earth card that's about generosity. But again, what's the catch is sometimes the question that I want to ask, or what is someone else gaining by giving? And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like, we can feel a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment by being generous, and that's an upside to giving. But if we're giving in order to have or hold power above other people, then what does that mean? So that's something to pause and sit with this week, and to ask yourself how the power dynamics in your relationships are revealing themselves throughout this eclipse window, and to ask yourself if you're over giving at times or giving from an empty cup because of how it causes you to feel. Maybe it makes you feel more secure when other people depend on you. Maybe it makes you feel more powerful when you feel that you're able to be the answer to someone else's problems. But at what cost? Maybe there's no cost. Maybe it's just gravy and it's good and it's cool. Or maybe there is something deeper that needs to be looked at here. Finally, our gift for this week is the Page of Cups reversed. So interesting that we have two pages showing up this week. Sometimes the pages represent children or young people. The Page of Cups, I often, I would associate with the water signs. Sometimes it feels more Piscean to me. But the Page of Cups reversed is someone who at times can get lost in fantasy or swept up in things that are not realistic, in outcomes that are not realistic, or can enjoy like a healthy dose of delulu that gets them into trouble. But this is showing up as a gift for us this week. And so maybe reclaiming your imagination or even connecting with a younger part of yourself could be really healing. Inner child work, basically, or doing some form of parts work or internal family systems to connect with a younger version of you who truly believed and could feel authentic hope. And maybe that's a part of you that you've had to shut down and that you've had to sort of like replace with discriminating energy or discernment. But if you get too deep into the sort of like self-protection, you at times can lose out on the hope and the magic. And this might be a week when you can adjust the scales and the balance there a little bit and come back to a place of magic, maybe in a sort of like contained or protected activity like coloring or painting or dancing or playing with kids or doing something that feels like it really connects with this younger part of you that was able to access that magic and hope, and that maybe feels afraid to show itself again because of how you've been hurt or taken advantage of in the past. This could also have to do with other people, right? So maybe we're able to hold space for someone else's tenderness, or maybe someone else does that for us. Whatever the case and however this shows up, it's a good time to be with your feels and to offer yourself a heaping dose of imaginative potential. That's all I have. I hope this was helpful. If you got something from this, please do like, comment, share, and subscribe if you want more. And otherwise, I will see you next week. Bye.